Okay, so in this demo, I'll go through iSCSI and failover clustering. To set up a failover cluster, you'll need two targets set up with using iSCSI. One of them will be the witness disk, and the other will be used for the service that you're attempting to cluster. So the first thing we'll need to do is to make sure your IP addresses are set properly. And for failover clustering, you need an IP on your interface that is accessible to all the clients on your network, but you also need this internal IP for the clustering heartbeat. You'll notice that I've got a different subnet that's used for that internal interface. So I have those IP addresses already set, and I have a connection to the domain controller, and I've tested that, everything works. The next step after you're sure that you have a connection to the domain controller is to begin the setup of the iSCSI target that has to be in place first. So I'll demonstrate how to set up the iSCSI target. I'll install the service role and set up the target to a VHDX virtual disk. And we'll set one up for the clustering service itself to be used for the witness for the quorum. And that'll get a vote in case one of these servers fails. We'll still have the witness disk and the other server to maintain quorum, and the other server will continue to run. And you'll also have to have a target for the service, and I'm just going to demonstrate DHCP. So we'll have to stop the DHCP service that's running on RWDC. And once we have the cluster set up and we have the two servers added to the cluster, then we can install the DHCP service and make the DHCP service run under the cluster. So it's a cluster-aware service. And you configure DHCP from within the cluster manager. And then we can test failover and set a preferred active cluster server and configure failback and test that. Test the DHCP is still working using the Windows client. Okay, so there's a little bit to set up. Let's bring up my servers and we'll install the iSCSI target on RWDC 01. So we open Server Manager. Now there's two areas to manage this. There's the client, which is the initiator, and there's the target. The initiator, the client, is listed here under iSCSI initiator, but you'll find that the target's not here. To set up the target, it's over here under File and Storage Services. And then there's iSCSI. So to create an iSCSI virtual disk, start the virtual disk wizard. Okay, so I'm going to use my server. It's American. I can pick the volume that I want to store this on. And it says it'll be saved under iSCSI virtual disk on the selected volume. So that'll be a directory on the root of the C drive. Give it a name. It's a witness disk, so I'll call it witness disk. And you can see it creates a VHDX file called witness disk in the iSCSI virtual disk directory. Size, 2 gigs is fine. Dynamically expanding, it'll only use the amount that it requires. And it gives me the IQN for this. This is actually the previous target, so I'm going to create a new iSCSI target. I've gone through this exercise before. And for the target, I will call it witness. Actually, I'm going to call it cluster. Cluster disks. You can use the same IQN for the target. So let's say you create another iSCSI target. You could use the same target name, so you don't have to reconfigure the initiators after you've added another disk. So I'll just put it all under one called the cluster disks. Hit next. So click Add to specify the iSCSI initiators that you want to use. So I can select the list. You can browse to find them. If you click Browse and then select your like server 2, for instance. So if I Shane Irish, that's the name of server 2. And it will find it, right? This is my server 2 and server 3. So I'll add them both as initiators for this target. Oh, that was one of them. Add the other. You can use CHAP authentication. Good chap. 12 characters. How many is that? And yeah, so that's done. So it creates the virtual disk for you. Sets up the target. If I take a look at my C drive now, I should be able to find it. There's iSCSI virtual disks, and there's the witness disk of HTX. You see it's not 2 gigs in size, I set it to be dynamically expanding. If I go over to server 2, just open the tools menu, you'll find the iSCSI initiator. And you can add a target, and this can just be the server name. So the name of the target, iSCSI target, and you can see there's the cluster disks target that I created. And it says unable to log into the target. It's fine. So I have it here. If I go to click connect again, under advanced I have an opportunity to put in the CHAP login information, and I'd use the name GoodChap. Okay, I'm connected. This other target is from a past exercise I had set up. So that's one of them. I'll go over to server 3. Let's do the same thing. Tools, iSCSI initiator. I'd used the fully qualified name last time, but you don't have to. Done. You can see that it's inactive right now, but I need to have it connected. So under advanced, CHAP login. So I'm connected. Great, so I have 2 initiators connected to a single target. If I open disk management, I can see that I've got that 2 gig unallocated drive, and it's currently offline. We'll bring it online on the server, and then initialize the disk. And I'll format it as NTFS and give it a drive letter. Okay, so it comes up as E. I already formatted, or I'm formatting it now. There, so E drive, witness disk, 2 gigs. Shows up as an E drive, 2 gigs in size. I can store files on it, treat it just like any other drive. But in reality, it's connecting back to RWDC. And all the contents that I write to witness disk are actually on this server inside this VHD file. So that's pretty cool, pretty easy to set up. iSCSI target and an initiator. If I take a look at that same drive that I'm connected to on server 2, I'd formatted it under server 3, right? So I'll open disk management here just to see what it looks like. And it says it's unallocated and it's unknown, it's offline. Try to bring it online. And this fails, it's not up to date. I'll just refresh. Okay, so it shows up as witness disk when it is online, has no drive letter. If I try to give it a drive letter and write contents to it, it doesn't work. Just messes things up. Only one of these servers will actually have a drive letter associated with it at a time. And it's important to note because inside the cluster manager, you'll have one of the servers will be active and have ownership over the iSCSI target at a time. You need to know which one is actively in control of the witness disk. Alright. So I have to run through that process again when we set up DHCP. But that's all that's required for the cluster manager. So the next thing to do would be to install the clustering service. So the feature, I should say. So right now I'm on server 2. I'll go to add roles. And Irish is my server 2. And there's a feature here called Failover clustering. I'll just go ahead and add that. I'm waiting for that. Oops. I'm waiting for that. I'll go over to server 3, do the same thing. Okay, so the server feature is done installing. And I'm currently on server 3. And it's the one that has ownership over the witness disk. And if I bring up the failover cluster manager, so there's clusterware updating, and there is failover cluster manager. So I want this failover cluster manager. First thing you want to do is validate the cluster, or validate your configuration. So just click on that. And it just goes through and it checks to make sure that everything's set up. In terms of a witness disk, and you have your IP address settings, and that you have an IP address and a different subnet for the heartbeat is what it'll check. I'm going to test it on this server that I'm currently at, that's server 3. I've already installed the service on server 2 that's here. And so there's Failover Cluster Manager. It's done installing. So I'll go ahead and add it as well. Next. Run all tests. Next, and then you just wait. Once you get this started, and run through and check everything. Okay, so the validation report, go through it. Everything passed. There's no errors, no warnings. If you get any errors or warnings, then you have to fix them. Everything should pass successfully, no problems. And you begin the configuration of the cluster. Okay, so the first thing it's asking for is a cluster name. Now this is the access point for administering the cluster. So what do you want to access the cluster as? I'm just going to call mine cluster. Nothing fancy. And if I go back to my diagram, I called it cluster and I gave it the IP address 192.168.0.5 was my plan. My external subnet is different than the diagram, so 1 is actually the external IP for me, and That's probably confusing. If I take a look at my IP address settings, you can see here my external Ethernet adapter is on the 1 subnet, and I have a failover NIC. It's on the 2 subnet. So this IP that you're using should be in the external subnet, the one that your clients on your private network can access. Whatever you set as a name here will become an object in Active Directory as well. There's a computer object created for it. So it has to be unique. And add storage, sure. It configures both this server and the other one in one shot, which is nice. How thoughtful. Microsoft. It also sets the node and disk majority. It's a node and disk majority for the cluster. Didn't ask us what we wanted, it just selects what it feels is best, and sees the witness disk and uses it. So when you expand this out, you can see there's no roles. I don't have any services I'm actually providing yet. It's 2 nodes, you can see them both. Storage, there's disks. You can see that it's online, it's the disk witness for the quorum, and the current owner is Joel, which is the server that I'm on right now. And you can see it's got a drive letter, drive E. It's important if you go to add it and it doesn't have a drive letter, then there's something wrong. If I take a look at the other server, see what's here. Opening roles, nodes, sees them. It sees that the owner is the other server. It's fine. There's a cluster network, cluster and client, cluster only. This is the external subnet and the internal for the heartbeat. That's all there is to it. The cluster's up and running. Now we need to configure a service to make it actually useful. Easy way to demonstrate it is using DHCP. So what I'll do is install the DHCP service on this machine. So back to add roles and features. So this will create a 2-node DHCP cluster so that if one DHCP server fails, the other one will immediately take over and continuing issuing addresses to clients. So we're waiting for that one. I'll go over to server 3 and install the DHCP service here as well. Now this is finished installing on server 2, and there's this complete DHCP configuration. When you click that, it allows you to authorize the DHCP server in Active Directory. So we just commit. It's already present. Okay. Make sure the server is authorized in Active Directory. If you just finish the server install, like here, and you hit close, and it's not authorized, then you'll run into problems. If you do close it, you can go back to here and there's complete the DHCP configuration and you can authorize it. That one authorized just fine. Okay, so I want to make sure. Okay, so this one's authorized, no problem. I knew it was authorized with the green arrows here anyway. Green check marks, I should say. This one's also authorized. So good, both the servers are authorized. Now, I have the DHCP, or I have the cluster set up. It's important that you install the DHCP service and you make sure it's authorized on each one of the servers. But it's also important that you don't configure the DHCP service. Just because you have the cluster service installed doesn't make everything clustered. You have to pick which services are available through the cluster server. Okay, so if you configure these individually, it won't work through the cluster service. That's just having more DHCP servers. So you just install it, you make sure it's authorized, then you close it. And don't configure it. And instead, go into, not there, we'll install the role through here. So there's configure role, so when you would add a role, and you're given a list, so you can install the DHCP server. And if you didn't already have the DHCP servers installed, it would tell you to do that. The other thing that's going to be required is some central storage to store the DHCP database in. We didn't create that yet, so I'll have to cancel. I've got to do that first. So go back to RWDC, and we need another VHDX target. So how to do that? I'm going to create a new iSCSI virtual disk. I'll store it in the same location. DHCP cluster. Another 2 gig. I'll use the existing cluster disks iSCSI target that I had before. I already have the initiators connected to it, so it saves me a step. Okay, that's all there is to creating the target. Go back over to server 2 and open disk management. I can see this other disk is here. Probably should have made them different size just so that it was more evident which one was which. But okay, so that's ready. Go to the other server and open disk management. Okay. I just had to refresh. Let's bring that one online. Okay, so DHCP cluster is there. No drive letter, which is fine. It has a drive letter on the other server. configure the role, DHCP server, DHCP cluster, I'll call it. This also creates an object in Active Directory. If I go back to RWDC, and I'll show you the cluster object that was created earlier. Oops. Active Directory. There's cluster. Once we set up the cluster service with DHCP, there will be a DHCP cluster there as well. And I need an IP address to use. And I had selected to use .4. Use whatever you like as long as it's unique. Oh, so there's no suitable storage available. So you have to make sure there's storage available to the cluster service before you get started. So I created this the iSCSI target and initiators, but I didn't add them to the cluster manager. So I'll add a disk. Okay, so I can see a drive letter here. The owner, it's available to the cluster manager, and then I'll configure the role. Okay, so the status is pending. Should change here in a moment. There we go. So now it's running. DHCP server. And you can see the current owner is Joel. You can stop the role. There's under properties. I'll just show you some of the settings here. You can have a preferred owner. So I can make server 3 the preferred owner of this service. It says use the bottom or the buttons to list them in the order most preferred at the top to the least preferred to the bottom. But if I check this off, it's the preferred owner. So if you had more than 2, it would become more obvious. Under failover, down here you've got failback, and it's set to prevent failback. I'm going to change it to allow failback immediately. So if the preferred owner fails, which I have set to Joel, and it'll fail over to the other server. When I bring the server back online, it'll become the owner again. If you have it set to the default, then it'll switch over to another server, but when you fix the original server that was the preferred owner, it won't come back, right? If you prevent failback. Okay, so the cluster service is running within the DHCP service is running within the cluster. But you still have to manage the DHCP server. So it's important that you open this through the DHCP or through the failover cluster manager. Okay, so you can see the name DHCP cluster, and I'll just create a new scope. 40. So I've got a handful of IP addresses I can give out. Don't need any exclusions. Set the router. You can see the DNS server already, so that's fine. And it asked me if I want to activate this now, and I'm going to go ahead and activate it, but before I do, I just want to go back over to RWDC and open the cluster, or the DHCP manager. And I already have a DHCP server running, so I just want to deactivate this scope. It's the only scope that I have, so I have this one deactivated, so it effectively shuts that DHCP server off. If you instead decide to stop the service, which you could do, you could go here and just stop the service. The trouble is, if you reboot the server, it'll start the service. It's set to start automatically at startup. So then you'll end up with two DHCP servers issuing addresses and creates duplicate addresses. So you're better off to deactivate the scope that you don't want issuing addresses. Finish. Okay, so the scope is active. And there's no address leases yet. Go to my Windows 8 machine and I'll just release my address. Okay, so I've got an address, 192.168.1.40. If I do ipconfig all, I can see what the IP address is of this DHCP server is 1.4, and that's the address that I use for the DHCP cluster. So it's working. I'm getting an address from the DHCP server that's within the cluster. Now I can, there are nodes here. I can drain these roles. So Joel's the current owner, the DHCP server service. And before I could even get back here, it switched to the other node is Irish. So I guess the status is just coming up. So it should switch to active. Running. Okay, so I'll go back to my Windows 8 machine. I can type. Okay, so I renewed with the same address that I had before. ipconfig all, it still sees it as the same DHCP server. So as far as the client's aware, there's no change. So that's failover. If I take this as currently Irish is the current node that's active, I go to it and I just shut down the server. We should see this change. Oh yeah, I left the other one as paused. That wasn't very smart. Joel's up and running. So before you do that, make sure you have both of the nodes set in a state that it's ready to fail over. Okay, so I've got server 2 back up and running. Roles are here, so I have Irish is currently the owner. Other things you could do, move it. select the other server. It'll take a moment for it to change to running on the other server. Yeah. That's about it. Other than shutting down one server and failing it over and failing it back is the other thing I'd like for you to test. Just to make sure that the preferred owner comes back online. That's it. That's how you set up a failover cluster.